Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Melanie Zanona in Washington, where the president is lashing out at the Supreme Court, threatening to use his power to destroy economic rivals and vowing a global tariff in response to the Supreme Court today dealing a serious blow to his signature economic policy, striking down most of the tariffs that his administration has imposed. The ruling raising many questions about what comes next for the White House's economic agenda, and also what happens to the billions of dollars it has already collected from those tariffs, which are now determined to be unconstitutional. Two of the president's Supreme Court picks, as well as Chief Justice John Roberts, joined the court's liberal justices in the historic 6-3 decision, ruling that the president exceeded his authority in using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose those sweeping tariffs on numerous countries. Chief Justice Roberts writing, quote, "The framers gave Congress alone the power to impose tariffs during peacetime. The president must point to clear congressional authorization to justify his extraordinary assertion of that power. He cannot." President Trump calling the decision a disgrace while accusing the justices of caving to foreign pressure in issuing this decision.
The Supreme Court's ruling on tariffs is deeply disappointing, and I'm ashamed of certain members of the court, absolutely ashamed, for not having the courage to do what's right for our country. It's my opinion that the court has been swayed by foreign interests and a political movement that is far smaller than people would ever think.
The president also vowing to invoke other presidential authorities to impose tariffs and other penalties on trading partners, and then announcing a 10% tariff worldwide.
But other alternatives will now be used to replace the ones that the court incorrectly rejected. We have alternatives. Today, I will sign an order to impose a 10% global tariff under Section 122, over and above our normal tariffs already being charged. And we're also initiating several Section 301 and other investigations to protect our country from unfair trading practices of other countries and companies. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
All things considered, it was a fairly calm day on Wall Street, with stocks closing slightly higher on the day. The ruling puts more than just the White House economic agenda in limbo, as Justice Brett Kavanaugh notes in his dissenting opinion. The court says nothing today about whether, and if so, how, the government should go about returning the billions of dollars that is already collected from these tariffs. President Trump telling reporters today that he believes that this particular issue will be tied up in court for years to come.
They take months and months to write an opinion, and they don't even discuss that point. We've taken in hundreds of billions of dollars, not millions, hundreds of billions of dollars. And so I said, well, what happens to all the money that we took in? It wasn't discussed. Wouldn't you think they would have put one sentence in there saying that keep the money or don't keep the money, right? I guess it has to get litigated for the next 2 years.
Are you saying that you don't plan to honor refunds for companies that file for them?
I just told you the answer, right? I told you the answer. It's not discussed. We'll end up being in court for the next 5 years.
NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joins me now, along with NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans, NBC News legal affairs reporter Gary Grumbach, and NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Tsirkin. An absolutely stacked lineup of reporters. Thank you all so much for joining us. Monica, I want to start with you at the White House because these tariffs had been really the centerpiece of Trump's economic agenda. So how big of a defeat does the administration see today's decision as being?
It is hard to overstate, Mel, just how significant this is for the president's agenda and really what a rebuke this is to something that he has considered a total cornerstone of this second term. This is something he talks about at every event, at every campaign rally. This is something he continually points to in terms of saying that he believes the economy is as strong as he thinks it is. So this is a White House that is absolutely on the back foot right now. And the president himself was absolutely fuming and very frustrated. The way that he learned about this in real time, ironically, he found out way later than the world did because he was in an event with these bipartisan group of governors this morning when an aide passed him a note informing him of the ruling, which he then called a disgrace. He essentially said he did have a backup plan, which I know we're going to talk about more later. But then he said that he had to leave this event early to try to figure out then how the White House was going to respond to it. And I have to tell you, Mel, this is a White House that has known this possibility could be coming for months, but it still took them a couple of hours to figure out exactly how they wanted to respond today. And they have provided little specifics on exactly now how they're going to position and message this. And remember, it's the president who has said recently that he feels they have a PR problem when it comes to the economy, one that just got way more complicated with this decision.
Yeah, somewhat surprising that they were so slow to respond to this. You mentioned the backup plan. So President Trump says he will impose a 10% global tariff. What provision or law is the White House using to justify this? And do we know when these tariffs will take effect?
So we know that the president is essentially now trying to make this argument under a larger national security umbrella. And when we talk about that 10% tariff, if you look at some of the other countries and remember back to so-called Liberation Day last April, there were way higher tariffs placed on some of these countries. So the fact that now you're going to have this baseline of 10% is, again, way lower, a huge difference in what initially they wanted to do. But this is an argument that the president is making and that his Treasury Secretary is saying they're going to be able to do under these provisions because, again, they can make this justification. There could still be, though, more court rulings. There could still be more challenges to this. This isn't the end of it. It's just something where the president is trying to make an argument. The administration is saying they still believe they can have a pretty high tariff revenue stream even in 2026, despite this major setback.
I know the markets definitely welcome today's decision. Is there any chance that the White House tries to spin this as a victory?
Well, I think that certainly you could see the president somehow doing that. He does like to sort of, when he's embattled in these moments, find a way to say, well, this is why it's even better. This could potentially now be a way for me to try this different approach that then, in his view or in his way that he will try to spin it, he'll argue was even better. Or if there are other positive economic indicators that come out that are separate from these tariffs in the coming weeks and months, I think you can't expect the president to celebrate that. But remember, he's the one who's saying you're going to feel more benefits of my programs down the line later this year. He's trying to tell people to be patient.
We shall see. Monica, Alba, thank you. Christine, I want to bring you into this conversation. What would a 10% global tariff really mean for American consumers?
I mean, it would be a relief, quite frankly, from the tariff rates that you're seeing right now. And it's way better than what we had seen way back in April on that Liberation Day when the president threatened huge tariffs, varying tariffs on countries around the world. I mean, so I think it's being taken as a positive for the cost of living story and the affordability story for American consumers. You know, the White House has said for so long, Mel, that these tariffs they're not a price problem. They don't cause inflation. They're not passed along to American consumers. The White House has said they're paid for by foreign governments, which is not true. They're paid for, of course, by the importers, the American companies that are importing these goods. So a 10% rate is definitely an improvement. But there are other tariffs that are still in place, and the president is actually threatening more tariffs using different authorities in the months ahead. So I think what you'll see in the near term, you're going to see importers rushing to get stuff in at a low tariff rate right now to stockpile for the rest of the year.
You said some tariffs are still in place. Can you tell me what tariffs are indeed still in place?
Well, for steel and aluminum, there are tariffs for the auto industry. There are some tariffs on pharmaceuticals. There are tariffs also on semiconductors. There are tariffs, though, there's blanket tariffs on China and Canada and Mexico. Those come off, and that's pretty important here because those are some of the most significant tariffs on America's biggest trading partners. So that will be a very near-term favorable thing for the cost of living story. And a reminder, you know, the White House has said that these tariffs don't add to costs for people, but the White House has also been lowering and removing tariffs, as you know, on some food goods from some countries. I think a tacit acknowledgement that when you put taxes on something that's imported that we don't necessarily make here, well, the prices rise for that.
That's such an important point. We did not see drastic inflation results resulting from Trump's tariffs. With no tariffs in place, will we see any price change?
I mean, the hope is that maybe, I mean, assuming that you don't have big onerous new tariffs that come on here very quickly. I mean, the Federal Reserve and others have been watching how tariffs have been passed through, and they think that there's a very short-term kind of one-time effect on prices, and that will start to get better over time. That was, of course, before this ruling. which essentially said the president of the United States illegally collected $133 billion worth of tariffs from American companies. Now, I've been talking to those American companies today, and boy, they'd really like to see a quick and an easy refund, which can be done. These are all electronic payments. But as you played here, it sounds like the president wants to fight, and he's going to, I guess, make these small businesses, medium-sized businesses, these importers, go to court to try to get their money back.
No doubt. Christine, thank you so much. Gary, I want to turn to you to dig into this decision. You're our court expert here. The justices appeared skeptical of the Trump administration's argument. Were there any surprises that stood out to you today in the decision?
So this is the way court watchers generally thought this was going to go, because the text of IEPA, the statute we're talking about here, is really clear. It says the president has the power in an emergency to regulate, to prescribe, to investigate, to prohibit. Nowhere does it say the president has the power to tax. Nowhere does it say the president has the power to tariff. And that is what Chief Justice John Roberts really focused in on. He didn't even get into the issue of whether or not that we're actually in an emergency right now. That he didn't need to, because it doesn't say tariff and it doesn't say tax.
Yeah, so in your view, was this more about tariffs, or was this ruling more about presidential authority?
So this is about presidential authority, but it's also about congressional power, right? This is putting the power that something Congress made back into the hands of Congress. And that is what certainly, when they were writing this bill years and years ago, that is certainly what they intended. And this is what Chief Justice John Roberts is putting forward here today.
You know, over the past few years, the court has really granted a lot of power to the executive branch, rescinded authority away from Congress. Do you see that sort of reversing with this ruling?
I mean, think about what we've already done and seen over the past year and a half, right? We've seen the federal workers being fired, and you've seen the Supreme Court being okay with that. You've seen a number of immigration moves, the Supreme Court being okay with that. The Supreme Court said, no, you can't do this here. That is a very significant step, but I wouldn't necessarily call it a changing of the way they're looking at things, because the president never had this authority in the first place. That's what IEPA says.
One thing that stood out to me in the briefing today is that Trump said he might fight in court any effort to provide refunds for these tariffs. What might that litigation look like?
Well, he doesn't have to fight in court, right? This is not a required thing that the Trump administration has to go to court for. There are ways, it's a real complicated process, but there are ways for tariff receipts to be sent to the federal government and for them to just pay back what is owed. It is hundreds of billions of dollars. There are hundreds and thousands of companies that now deserve this money back. This does not have to go to court, but it likely will, because the Trump administration has done that hundreds of times over the past year and a half.
Something else Trump said in the briefing today was that this decision provided him with, quote, very powerful alternatives to impose tariffs. Is he right?
So, sort of. The court did not say, oh, here's a bunch of alternatives. That's certainly not what Chief Justice John Roberts laid out. In his dissent, what Associate Justice Brett Kavanaugh said was there are 5 or 6, and here's a list of them, 5 or 6 different ways that the president can legally impose tariffs. Some of them have to go through the United States Trade Representative, who was up there right behind the president at the briefing room today. Certainly he'll be supportive of anything the president tries to do.
Oh, I'm sure. Julie, Democrats are calling today's ruling a victory for Democrats. But what are Republicans saying on Capitol Hill?
Republicans are, for the most part, kind of lukewarm about this ruling. Can't think of a Republican besides maybe Bernie Moreno, who we'll talk about in a second, of Ohio, who's really going to bat like the president is, with that fire, with the anger at this ruling. Most of them are saying, you know what, we'll take a look at this decision. Congress and the White House will talk. That's what Speaker Johnson is saying, Leader Thune as well. But there are some Republicans who are applauding this ruling, including the 4 who voted in October. I'm talking about Senator Mitch McConnell, for example, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, who voted to rebuke some of the president's tariffs back in October. Leader McConnell, for example, saying that this ruling is essentially reaffirming that Trump circumventing congressional authority is illegal.
I mean, to that point, this is such a victory for members of Congress who have seen their power eroded over the years, in some ways because they gave that power to the Trump administration. But how are lawmakers viewing that in this context?
Well, here's the thing. You heard the president say it today. We don't need Congress. We don't need any of them to try and affirm these tariffs that they want to impose, and they have been imposing. But they kind of do need Congress, right? That's what the Supreme Court reaffirmed today. That's what Gary was just talking about. And the thing is, though, the president knows he doesn't currently have the votes to reaffirm his powers. So he's essentially employing or deploying the strategy of continuing to push Congress to the side to say they already did all they needed him to do on the one big beautiful bill, for example. Everything else on the tariff policy, he's got it. He'll let them fight in the courts. He's certainly not going to get the Republican votes to keep imposing those tariffs.
I mean, speaking of not having the votes, what about this idea that you mentioned Bernie Moreno is pushing, which is doing another reconciliation package to try to impose tariffs? Is there any shot of that passing on Capitol Hill?
The short answer, no. And I can think of a million issues. We were talking about this, health care for one, other issues that Republicans don't see the votes for in a bipartisan way. They're saying, you know what, let's do it through reconciliation, because it did work for them in the summer. There were even skeptics that that would happen and that would come across the finish line. A lot of Republicans want the president to be talking about the victories they saw from that, the tax cuts that they were able to extend over the summer. They don't want to be talking about a protruded battle that Democrats, quite frankly, would be willing to have a messaging war months ahead of the midterm elections on essentially trying to codify the president's power to raise taxes. That's not something Republicans want to talk about, but Bernie Moreno is, so we have one.
And notably, Trump himself said he doesn't see the need for another reconciliation bill. So a divide there, as usual. Gary and Julie, thank you both so much for joining us. While slamming the Supreme Court's decision, President Trump also said this ruling has now given him more power. Take a listen.
But now the court has given me the unquestioned right to ban all sorts of things from coming into our country, to destroy foreign countries. But a much more powerful right than many people ever thought we even had, but not the right to charge a fee. How crazy is that? Our country is the hottest country anywhere in the world right now. And it was a dead country 1.5 years ago under an incompetent president. But now I'm going to go in a different direction, probably the direction that I should have gone the first time, but I read the language. I'm very good at reading language, and it read our way 100%, but now I'll go the way I could have gone originally, which is even stronger than our original choice.
Joining me now is Tim Brightbill, an attorney specializing in international trade law and policy. Grateful for your expertise. I'm sure you read language very well, as Trump also said. I want to start by asking you about this 10% global tariff, as well as the other tariffs that are under the sections of law. First of all, does he actually have the authority to do that, in your view, especially based on this ruling? And could these new tariffs also be challenged in court?
So the president does have authority under Section 122 to impose these tariffs. It's never been used before in the 50 years that it's been on the books. So it is unprecedented, but the authority is there. Now, and that allows up to 15% tariffs. The president announced 10% today, and that can stay in place for up to 150 days. After that point, Congress would have to reauthorize those tariffs going forward.
So he says these new tariffs are the stronger choice and seem to suggest he'd have broader authority. Is that right?
I'm not sure it's broader authority. I think it's narrow to fill a balance of payments issue for a temporary period of time. But it might give the administration some time to use some of the other tools in the toolbox. You heard the U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer refer to other tools, Section 301 of the trade laws, the national security laws under Section 232. So this temporary tariff could allow those other tools to come into play soon after.
I want to talk about the impacts here, because that is so important. Talk to me about what you think these new tariffs could have an impact in terms of the global economy as well as the American consumer.
Well, I think it's early to say what the impact will be. We already have hundreds of billions of dollars of tariffs in place. There are agreements with our major trading partners. I don't expect that those agreements will be thrown out immediately. I think they will remain in place. Most countries would probably choose to have the certainty of an agreement that they've negotiated over the chaos of what we've seen over the last year. So I think we'll have to see how this plays out with our trading partners. Now, for businesses and companies and industries, they want certainty, right? They want to know what's coming so that they can plan accordingly. So they're looking to get their refunds if possible, and they're looking to know what the future will hold so that they can conduct business going forward.
What about the impact in terms of revenue? Because the president says he will now be taking in even more revenue than before. Do you buy that?
I think it's unlikely. I mean, there has been a huge amount, unprecedented amount of tariffs collected, but I don't think the new authorities necessarily will lead to even greater collections. And of course, there are possible court challenges to these new tariffs that might be introduced as well.
The other question I had, and he flicked at this in the briefing, is that some of these trade deals will remain in place. Some of them will be renegotiated. I mean, what is your view when it comes to having to renegotiate some of these trade agreements?
So my personal view is that most countries will choose to keep in place anything that they've already negotiated. They'd rather have the certainty. They'd rather know, even if they're going to have to pay tariffs, what that tariff level will be. But we haven't concluded those agreements with many of our major trading partners, the European Union, for example. So that does cause a bit of chaos. We'll have to see how that plays out as far as will there be negotiations, and has the president lost some leverage in those discussions with the EU and many of our other major trading partners.
I think the other question on a lot of people's minds, certainly on my mind, is how these refunds are going to work. $266 billion in total tariff revenue has already been collected, and of that, $133 billion was collected under the IEEPA. So American consumers were the ones who paid most of these tariffs. Trump seemed to suggest that he would not be paying them out. I mean, how do you see that refund process potentially playing out?
I think it'll move fairly quickly. This will go back to the Court of International Trade in New York, which first ruled that the IEEPA tariffs were illegal. There hopefully will be some sort of administrative process set up. Importantly, the Justice Department, President Trump's Justice Department, has already said that there will be refunds of these tariffs. So if the president were to try to change course, the courts are going to hold the Justice Department to what it's already said. So we're looking to see if there will be an orderly process for getting refunds back to consumers and businesses. Now, of course, consumers didn't pay the tariff, and they won't directly get refunds. It will go back to the importer of record who paid the tariffs originally.
So don't expect a check in your pocket.
Not anytime soon. That's right. Unfortunately, yes.
Tim, thank you so much for your expertise. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.